Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Washington Monthly Politics live stream. Today is June 23rd, 2025. So, what happens when a self professed isolationist president goes to war? I'm Ann Kim, contributing editor for the Washington Monthly, and
Well, it looks like we lost Ann, but we'll get our fearless leader back in a moment. I'm Paul Glastris, editor-in-chief of the Washington Monthly. Welcome to the Washington Monthly live stream. Our guests today are Matt Cooper, our executive director of digital at the Washington Monthly, and Jacob Heilbrunn, longtime contributor to the magazine and the editor of the National Interest. Gentlemen, welcome. Great to have you here. So there's so much to talk about this thing. Let me kind of give you my take on it, and you guys can react to it. You can agree, you can disagree. The simplest way I can describe what we're going to talk about what is likely to happen, but I want to just sort of, for a minute, we don't know what's going to happen, but we do have a pretty good sense of how we got here. And the way I would formulate how we got here is basically Donald Trump, and welcome back. We've already started.
Sure, go ahead.
Donald Trump inherited just a few months ago when he became president the second time, a situation inherited from Joe Biden that allowed him to do what he did over the weekend. That is, the United States proxy governments, primarily Israel and Ukraine, had so weakened the adversaries of the United States, primarily Iran and Russia, that Netanyahu, that Donald Trump could bomb these nuclear development sites with minimal immediate military risk. That was the opportunity he was given. The ultimate reason that he felt it necessary to do, because he did not want to, we know that, he would much rather have cut a deal, is the deal he got out of in his first term, which was the one negotiated by Barack Obama, that where Iran agreed to limit its development of nuclear fuel and freeze its nuclear weapons activities. Those are the two things that are the backdrop to how we got here. And let me just ask Jacob, who has given a lot of thought to this, to react to that idea.
Paul, I do think you're onto something. And as we talked about earlier, the media has downplayed or overlooked the fact that it was Trump who ripped up Obama's deal with Iran originally and set us on the path to war with Iran. I have to say, frankly, I'm not sure any of this was necessary. And my gut is that we are going to discover in coming days and weeks that this does look very much like Iraq War #2 from 2003. And frankly, I have the willies about the whole thing. If you look at the New York Times headline last night, it was that the administration doesn't know where the highly processed uranium is.
Yeah, apparently there were imaging and intel that showed trucks near the basis of these underground bunkers moving stuff out days before the bombing.
Now, past does not have to be prologue. Maybe, Trump by some miracle, pulls it all off. However, what we're seeing looks pretty darn similar to what we saw before, which is that there is, in fact, no plan for any of this. And then what results is chaos. Now, this takes us back. I'm not drifting from your question. This is the very reason that even though Biden may have set up the preconditions for Trump's assault on Iran. I'm highly dubious that Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, if she were president now, would have pulled the trigger on these facilities,
Right.
because in essence, he has opened up a Pandora's box. So previous presidency, including George W. Bush, by the way, who was being urged to attack Iran rather than Iraq in 2003. He thought Iraq would be the easy country to topple. Well, this is why everyone has flinched. Now, Trump, I think, who is egged on by the generals who have scores to settle with Iran dating back to the Iraq War, because it was Iranian munitions, IEDs, that were the most lethal weapons targeting American soldiers. So I think Trump is an impulsive guy. The incentives were all there for him. He wants to go down in history as a great president. He was looking weak over the past month. Everything lined up for him to do this. But
yeah, go ahead,
I
Matt.
would say just to build on what Paul and Jacob have said, it's not only that Trump threw out the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany and Iran, had forged, that seemed to keep Iran in the box. It may not have been perfect, but it had a get the job done quality that was basically working. But that Trump, after having thrown it out in his first term, in his second term, reopened the souk, so to speak, to try to form his own JCPOA, and was giving away the store. I think this is the guy who was ready to bring the Taliban in to Camp David on the anniversary of 9/11, when he was trying to cut an agreement with the Afghan regime. And so I think there was a certain, look, Bibi obviously is an unprincipled character who is trying to ensure his own survival, but I think the Israelis had a legitimate reason to think we were seeing give away the store Trump with Iran. And I think Bibi's always been predisposed to move on Iran. I think he had even more cause. And so Trump not only screwed himself and put us in this box, as you all said, by throwing out the JCPOA originally, but then by trying to go back and form his own JCPOA, or unilateral version thereof. Madness.
What do you guys think I was going to ask what you thought Trump's options are from here. What can he do?
He can listen. Look, Jacob is right. There are generals out there, and the 4-star who was in command of this mission is someone who's well known to be very aggressive. So if you ask the general in the field who's got a reputation for aggressiveness, hey, what do you think we should do? He's going to say, go for it. At the same time, I was speaking earlier this morning to a longtime source who in the national security arena with direct operational knowledge of the region right now, and he was reminding me that in the past, like when the United States took out this senior military official, Suleiman, the Iranians did some, or I think it was their proxies, some strikes at U.S. military bases, I believe in Iraq. They sort of signaled to the U.S. that they were limited, let them know they were coming in advance. And the U.S. retaliated in a limited way. That gave the regime's going to have to do something. What the regime, if it's wise, and it's not shown a lot of wisdom recently, if it's wise, will do what it did last time, which is not want to go up the escalatory ladder, right? Because the United States has far more ability, if it wants to retaliate hugely. And so, something limited, something signaled in advance, then the wise thing, to answer your question, Anne, is for the Trump administration to listen to the generals. And I think this is what they're going to hear he's going to hear from the generals. This is a performative quality to this. Let's retaliate, but not escalate too much, and then see where that goes. And you do that, you might have this sort of not be Armageddon. But if the Iranians choose to mine the Strait of Hormuz, if they start, really harassing our ships in the region, our Navy hates being in that region because they're vulnerable. If the retaliations are persistent and escalatory, then Trump and the Pentagon are going to be very, very tempted to just destroy the Iranian Navy. Our military has the ability to do that, to really, really escalate. And boy, then you're at war.
The problem, Paul, is that the Iranians must feel like their back is to the wall. When you have Trump coming out calling for, of all things, regime change in a tweet last night, I don't know that the Iranians can distinguish perfectly between reality and hallucination with Trump. And the other part is that Trump has clearly lied to the Iranians. I mean, it looks like these negotiations were camouflage for an assault. You couple that with his language, and the Israelis are still heavily bombing Iran. And my sense is that they would like to do to it what they did to Syria, which is devastate it as a military power. It's not about nuclear weapons. It's about eviscerating the Iranian military, and Israel emerges as the hegemon of the Middle East. There will be no other power in the Middle East that commands the kind of military might that Israel does. Syria's gone. Lebanon has been disposed of. Iraq, was invaded and is not a threat. Iran was the big menace. I think we're headed for a much greater conflict.
That's it can always get worse. I think that's a good instinct. Just to take a little bit of a glass half full advocacy, especially after speaking to a source who's really steeped in this morning. I think the Iranians are fairly limited in their response for now. It doesn't mean they can't mine the Strait of Hormuz, but I don't think they're totally irrational actors. I think they will take action, but I suspect they have a lot of options, from killing dissidents overseas. Strike in the U.S. on Iranian dissidents is not impossible. And frankly, something Trump's immigration people might like. So I think they're somewhat limited there. And I think also Trump by nature does not have the George W. Bush, Dick Cheney messianic belief in democracy in the Middle East. Thank goodness. He does not really. He's not a Democrat to begin with, small d. And I don't think he has any, intention of thinking it can take root overseas. So that's at least one thing to counsel against him wanting to get in there. But I agree with you. It can definitely get much worse.
Let me just interject quickly, Matt, because one thing worries me about what you said, which is that Trump operates like a mob boss. And I don't think he's going to he's in it already. And if the Iranians defy him, I think his instinct is to crush them.
You could well be right.
Well, let's turn now to the question of how Congress will or should react. And they're grappling with two separate but overlapping questions here. The first being the legality of the strike, because under the Constitution, only Congress can declare war. Are we in a war? And number two, whether the strike was the right thing to do, legal or not. So in that first question, we have senators like Tim Kaine of Virginia, who wanted Trump to get congressional approval before this. And now in the House, you've got Tom Massey and Ro Khanna of California arguing the same. On the other hand, you've got senators like Lindsey Graham who say Trump was well within his rights. You've also got these diehard MAGA isolationists like Marjorie Taylor Greene and progressives like AOC arguing on the other side that the strikes were a mistake. So how do you see all of this in Congress sorting out? And how durable is that loyalty to Trump? On the MAGA side of the aisle, Jacob, you can speak to this, and when and if the backlash will begin?
I think the Democrats are largely positioning themselves, if this is a failure, to be able to denounce Trump. And I think it's the right political call. They really don't have much choice. And Trump is behaving in this conflict. It's another opportunity for him to display his contempt for Congress. He didn't even consult the Democrats. It probably is unconstitutional what he did, but he doesn't care. And you have the Bob Kagan arguing that it's a prelude to upping authoritarianism in the US, which I don't think is going to happen, because I think this war is going to be a fiasco.
I mean, just as a general matter, Congress has for decades now progressively given away its power over the executive in matters of war. We're already seeing major MAGA figures like Charlie Kirk come round to supporting Trump on this, who were hardcore isolationists, America Firsters, which was all perfectly predictable. I think the MAGA forces that are still against what Trump did and are going to try to hold out will do as the Democrats are doing, and hold their powder, but hope that things do go poorly, and be ready to pounce when they do. But I think it's wise for and strategically smart for Democrats and others to bring up the abuse of separation of powers that we're seeing. I just don't see any possibility that it matters in the near term.
Let me take a somewhat different take, which is I think the Democrats are in more of a pickle, both intellectually and politically. I think intellectually, look, they were more than willing to let the authorization for the use of military force that Congress passed after 9/11 be extended to include Libya and other nations in Africa to use drone strikes promiscuously. I think and now you can say there's a difference between that and this, and maybe there is, but I think it's a harder case to make when they've relied on a rather elastic definition of presidential war-making powers. And then second, politically, I think if you look at something like Hakeem Jeffrey's statement, and I agree, keeping your powder dry, being in a position to pounce when this thing goes south, as I agree with Jacob, it most likely will. But nevertheless, I think there was a certain churlishness. And I think if you were, online the last couple of days and saw the reaction of kind of prominent Jewish groups and Jewish Democrats and others, being surprised about the somewhat churlish quality of this. I mean, the degrading of the Iranian nuclear threat and with all the dangers that come with it is still something that is not totally to be sniffed at. And in that sense, I think Democrats can't look either too legalistic or too eager for this to fail. I'd say keep your powder dry, but don't, keep your condemnations of Iran up. And there was none of that in, for instance, the Hakeem Jeffrey statement last night or Saturday night.
The key will be gas prices.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to get to that question, actually, Jacob. In the 5 minutes we have remaining with you, let's talk about what the impact of this war is going to be on Americans here at home, including, now a very heightened risk of a global recession because of gas prices. But there are other threats too. And Matt, you alluded to this with the idea of unconventional retaliation that Iran could do. It came across this white paper from 2016 from the Idaho National Laboratory warning of cyber attacks on the nation's power grid, and it specifically cited Iran as a potential threat. So you've got these kinds of unconventional threats out there. What could we expect to see in a worst case scenario? What can we expect to see inevitably as a result of this conflict?
Be a good time to take down America's electric grid with 100-degree temperatures across the country.
Take a lot.
I think that there will be, if this war grinds on, and we are now begging the Chinese, the Trump administration went to China and asked them to ensure that Iran does not close the Strait of Hormuz. So that vitiates Trump's leverage there with China. And if gas, oil is at around 80, if it goes above 100, people will become very unhappy in the United States. It'll be a good issue for the Democrats. They can start putting the "Thank you, Donald's" stickers on the gas pumps, the way people did with Biden.
Yeah. I think the bottom line to your question, Ann, is it is anybody who says they know what's going to happen next hasn't been reading the news over the last 2 decades very carefully. The unpredictability of what's going to happen, there's just too many variables. And, Matt, I'm torn as to whether a Democratic president in the situation Trump was in, right? Imagine, Kamala Harris has been elected. She would possibly have been in a better position to get a deal with Iran diplomatically. But the damage had been done by Trump. So if you assume they were in the same position, Jacob said no Democrat, or
I agree with that.
I'm not sure a Hillary Clinton wouldn't have made the same choice as Donald Trump did. I don't know about Kamala Harris, but it wasn't the easiest call in the world given the conditions. So we're going to know maybe in 10 years whether this was wise. I don't think we're going to know in 3 months or 6 months, or certainly tomorrow.
I think that's.
Well, I think it's pretty
totally
clear
right.
that the economy, well, he could have put the economy in a better position to absorb a shock like this one, but with the tariffs in place, this one big beautiful bill is going to increase our deficit situation, the deportations he's carrying out that are also wreaking havoc on the economy. To me, it seems kind of clear that this is a mistake for the U.S. economy, at least if nothing else, to be carrying out.
I see no way that it helps.
I don't think it's going to take as long to figure this out, Paul. I think it's already starting to erode. And the other part of the problem that we haven't talked about is, look, obviously Bibi maneuvered this brilliantly.
100%.
Not in America's interest. And Trump's team is a team of clowns. Frank Bruni has a good piece in the New York Times today. These guys are not capable of conducting a longer term conflict, nor, by the way, is Trump, who has the attention span of a gnat. He reacts impulsively, to every latest development. I don't believe that these guys can safely steward our fortunes now that they have triggered this conflict.
Yeah, we devoted half of our last live stream, and to precisely the point that Jacob made, which is we haven't had a national security team with less experience of running major national security operations in our lifetime.
The other point, Paul, is that they don't even have a process.
Right.
There's no one drafting papers. No one's figured out, here's what the Iranians would do with you.
They do have a signal channel, apparently.
Right. But apparently the New York Times is reporting that the Iranians, based on Trump's tweets, started moving the uranium. I mean, this is a one-man show.
Yeah. No, it's Friday. You make it. I hope we know sooner rather than later the fallout from this. I would not personally predict that in 6 months people are going to say, "Oh, I'm so glad Donald Trump took out these missile facilities." as a matter of operation, regardless of the killing of some senior scientists, Iran has been at this now for decades. There's really not too many examples of countries being stripped of their capacities to produce nuclear weapons. These things are now embedded in their networks, their knowledge base, and if they have the equipment and the fuel, they can still do it. And let us also, to go back to the point about the Obama agreement. With the Obama agreement, we had international inspectors swarming Iran, and though it is technically possible, and conservatives went on and on about these, very unlikely possibilities of the Iranians being able to operate outside of those inspections, they were very, very proctological in their sweep. That's all gone, right? And we had them weeks ago. What we know came from international inspectors. That's now gone. So our ability to know what they're doing is now gone. And we are looking at Iran the way we looked at Iraq, which is we had no idea whether they did or did not have nuclear capacity.
Right.
Okay.
And as my source said this morning, and it's conjecture, but certainly plausible, had we stuck with JCPOA, that really might have led to regime change.
Yeah.
I mean, there really was a lot of dissatisfaction with the mullahs, and we may find out that Trump has saved the regime in Tehran.
But Bibi has won.
Bibi is one. Well, Jacob, I want to thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank
I know
you.
you need to run to another podcast. Jacob Heilbrunn, who's the editor of The National Interest and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Jacob, thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to come on to the show.
Great. Thank you.
See you again.
Thanks, Jacob.
No one knows more.
Okay, and Matt and Paul, if you can stick around, we can turn to some domestic issues. Congress is still working on that reconciliation bill. They have a self-imposed deadline of July 4th to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is looking increasingly unlikely given the measures that were stricken from the bill already by the Senate's parliamentarian, Elizabeth McDonough. So just a quick refresher, in order for the Senate to pass the bill under reconciliation with just 51 votes, the special rules, it needs to pass muster under the so-called Byrd Rule, named after former Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia. Matt, some pretty important provisions got knocked out this week during the so-called Byrd bath, including a provision to slash funding for the CFPB and a few other important provisions. Can you bring us up to speed on where this bill stands and how likely is it that the July 4th deadline is going to be met?
I think it's going to be tough. They set an ambitious deadline of trying to get this done sooner than they had to, and Congress almost always, like a college freshman, is pulling an all-nighter and then some to try to get their work done on. So I think that's unlikely, and I think there's a basic rule of big controversial legislation in Washington, which is like the longer it sits around, the more flies it attracts. Time is not on your side. That's part of why they want to get done by July 4th, because the more people nitpick at it, the more the lobbyists get their fingers into it. Just the more problems you have, the more support starts to waver, the more members hear from back home about something they don't like. So I have generally believed that no Republican wants to be holding the gun, standing above the body if this thing goes down. No one wants to be the one responsible for killing Trump's signature piece of legislation of the second term. But I think the odds of it not passing have gotten a lot bigger. I think it's just dragging. It is a lot for Congress to chew. I think some of these Freedom Caucus types have been, been called on their bluffs too many times. And so I wouldn't venture to guess if he's going to get it at this point. In the past, I've been pretty confident he could, but I'm not so sure.
Mm-hmm. Paul, do you have thoughts on this?
I agree with Matt. I suspect that Mike Johnson has proven to be a little more effective than you might have thought, given the lack of experience he had going in. The Senate Majority Leader is a non-crazy Republican who I don't think is going to do Trump's bidding. And so the capacity for the two sides to negotiate something is, better than you might have predicted. There's just so much weighing against this thing. The public polling on it is terrible, just terrible. Obviously, when you ask, voters, what do you think of this budget bill, you're going to get polling that breaks on partisan lines, and a lot of it is in the wording. But even what the nature of this bill is, the basic nature of the bill, which is massive tax cuts for corporations and wealthy individuals and crumbs for everyone else, that will make the deficit soar. That's pretty widely understood now. There's just been a lot of reporting on it, and a lot of people have talked about it. And independents are overwhelmingly against it. Republicans are barely for it. Democrats overwhelmingly against it. It is a very, very unpopular piece of legislation. Doesn't mean that it'll affect the end result, but one's desire to not be the guy holding the gun over the dead body, as Matt put it, has to be. If you're a Republican running in 2026, balanced against being the guy who put his or her name to this very unpopular thing. So my gut sense is that they will get it done somehow, but that is probably right. Time is not their friend.
No. And the parliamentarian did make their job infinitely harder. I mean, the parliamentarian has stricken out provisions that are not primarily budgetary. That's how the bird really works.
Right.
And a large part of this bill was about policy, and you cannot do policy as part of reconciliation.
Right,
Hence,
exactly.
their provision to get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as a policy change. So now they've got to scrounge up the money they would have saved by getting rid of that. They got rid of a bunch of provisions from the Inflation Reduction Act, and now they have these huge holes that they need to fill somehow. So
and the point you're making, Ann, is this is the thing that stuck in the craw of the Freedom Caucus Republicans, was the size of the deficits. And the CBO, even though it's controlled by the Republican Party at this point, stuck to their guns and put out pardon me?
It's nonpartisan.
Well, yes, but the Republicans are in charge of Congress. They stuck to their guns and put out a pretty devastating estimate on the size of the deficits that would be created. If it gets bigger, which it now is, thanks to the parliamentarian, these Freedom Caucus guys got to, eat some more crow. And at some point, it just becomes impossible for them to square with their base.
Yeah, and just as a relevant aside, I mean, we're always looking, well, what institutions are going to hold up in Trump's general assault on democratic norms and institutions? And you have to say that the congressional bulwarks, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office and the Office of the Parliamentarian, have held up pretty well. I mean, they did not, CBO did not engage in the dynamic scoring that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is insisting they should really do. The parliamentarian didn't fold to give them everything they wanted. So, two cheers for that at least.
Can I also make a point going back to our previous discussion with Jacob? The intelligence community didn't take a dive for Trump on Iran. As they have before with Venezuela and other things. This time, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, came to Congress and delivered the message that Iran shows no signs of moving toward building a nuclear weapon. And Trump had to denounce his own DNI on social media and to reporters. So curious how the bureaucracies have somehow rallied to sustain themselves under immense pressure.
Mm-hmm. So one piece of good news.
One piece of good news.
Take what you can get.
Right, right. There's a huge week coming up for the Supreme Court as it finishes up its session, but there was one very large decision last week when the Supreme Court upheld a Tennessee law that banned gender-affirming treatment for transgender minors. And that was a 6-3 decision. And what they held was that this particular law in Tennessee does not violate equal protection laws. So now there's been a lot of coverage about the disappointment within the trans community and the gamble they took to bring this to the courts. But this decision is also putting a lot of pressure on progressives and Democrats who are now struggling with how to handle this issue. You've got people like California Governor Gavin Newsom who now say they support bans on transgender women. This decision, I think, has also eroded some faith in the courts to save us all from some of the excesses of this administration. What would your advice be to progressives about how to move forward on a set of issues without betraying progressive principles, but also not, sacrificing a group of really vulnerable individuals on an altar of political expediency? Do you see a path for resolving this brewing conflict within the progressive left?
Yeah. Well, I think there is a way to thread the needle, both rhetorically and legally, and that the first thing is to say, look, everybody deserves to be treated decently and with respect. That's the first thing. And I think the second thing is, for adults, laissez-faire, that's the other thing, because a lot of the conservatives are going after adult transgenders. They framed it as a kids issue, but that's their legislative proposals and other things are aimed at adults. And so that puts you on the humane side against Trump's, callous, cruel, and ultimately anti-American, dismissal of transgender personnel from the armed services and civilian and Pentagon employees. And then when it comes to kids, I think you have to have a sort of, you have to have a little bit of a follow the science guideline. And frankly, the science has gotten a little tougher for the most assertive transgender advocates, as some European countries and others have sort of pared back on this, not because they have a big right-wing religious fundamental constituency, but because the science has been a little more skeptical about the long-term health effects of these things. And frankly, you do have rifts among gay advocates and others who are saying, there are been a lot of prominent gay advocates who have said that, hey, these are a lot of times these are kids who are gay and they're being told, no, you're a girl, and maybe feel a little pressure into surgery when in fact they're gay. So I think there's a way to be humane, to be on the right side of science, to be on the right side of the law. I don't think this was a good decision because I think the Supreme Court kind of showed its cards when they allowed Tennessee to continue to allow these therapies for other medical issues. That sort of showed that it was not just the danger of puberty blockers and such, but it was really the trans animus that was guiding the Tennessee State House. So I think Democrats can find a way forward, but I don't think they need to also go to a maximalist position about, biological males in women's sports and such. I think they can thread the needle adroitly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I believe they can.
This was not about the issue that most upsets a lot of normal American swing voters, which is the sort of transgender women athletes playing sports, which has really been a difficult subject for Democratic elected officials. This was about the right of parents and their doctors to do what's best for their children. I think that's a bad place for America to be. It's a bad place for Republicans to be. It's not defending that is not going to break through and be a great thing for Democrats, but it's the right place to be. All of us at this point know some set of parents who've had to navigate this with their kids. And it's hard. These are hard decisions. We want the Supreme Court and state legislatures to be making that decision for parents. I think that's a pretty easy place for Democrats to be. Again, I agree with Matt. That is not the issue that Democrats should be running on. Far from it. It still is something that makes people uncomfortable. And it's not what people care about when they're barely able to make a living. But it's the right place to be. And I don't think it's a bad political place to be.
Mm-hmm. I want to put in a quick plug before we get to our final question for the podcast. Washington Monthly podcast episode that's coming out on Wednesday. Garrett Epps and I have an interview with Allison Gash of the University of Oregon, who is one of the nation's foremost experts on this topic and on LGBT equality. Her argument is that LGBT rights generally are under assault, and the Supreme Court's next target, or at least conservatives' next target, is to get Obergefell versus Hodges, the Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage, under the microscope again, possibly to be rethought, and if they have their way, overturned. So that'll be coming out on Wednesday morning. So final question for you guys. What are you looking for this week? Besides Iran, obviously, what's happening there?
Well, I'll be...
Go ahead.
Just go first. I mean, two things. One is Congress is back. They're not only going to deal with all this reconciliation stuff, but they're going to get these big closed-door briefings on Iran. And I think the good thing for reporters about big closed-door briefings is they don't stay that closed. And so we may find out more about the after-action report, about what actually happened on the ground there. And the other thing, of course, is the New York City mayoral race, where the primaries this week. Democratic primary
tomorrow.
used to be decisive for who would be mayor in the fall. Less so now that the incumbent and Andrew Cuomo, until now, the front runner in the Democratic side, have vowed to stay in on a separate ballot line in the fall. But all eyes are going to be on Zohar Madani, the juggernaut, a 33-year-old socialist city council person who is giving Cuomo a big run, has an incredible army of volunteers and an incredibly energetic campaign, and could wind up the Democratic nominee. So be watching that.
Yeah, I am once again glad that I don't live in New York, don't have to vote in that election. I can't figure out how it works with ranked choice voting and all that, much less who, if anyone, deserves to be the candidate, deserves to be mayor. I'm not seeing a lot of what I would be looking for in a mayoral candidate, which is a light, sort of hard focus on improving government functions in New York. That's to me the winning message, and I'm not hearing it from anyone. But I'm mostly not paying attention. And the thing I am most looking forward to this week is getting into the pool and doing some swimming. It is hot out there, and the pool beckons.
Yes. Yeah. Well, on that note, it's great seeing you guys this morning. I'm Ann Kim, contributing editor, Washington Monthly, joined today by editor-in-chief Paul Glastris and executive editor digital, Matt Cooper. See you guys next week. Hopefully the heat dome will have passed by then.
Yes. Stay cool.
Take care.